Alright, next thing we need to do is open the overflow.html file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out my browser preview. Before I exit out this, make sure I use save. And I'm actually going to click open, so I'm in the same folder, and it says I'm dealing with overflow, so I'm going to choose overflow.css file, and then open. Then exit out your old CSS file. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see it. Now you'll notice when we open this file, it's saying there's a syntax error. Don't worry about that. This is from the example text he has here. If you see more than one, you will want to check because there's something wrong with your file probably. But I'm going to scroll down here because this is where my text, I'm going to end up typing it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up, I click on the menu button and then choose browser preview. And then of course remember, choose your HTML file. So overflow 02 overflow.html. Remember selection for this file and preview. So this one's kind of cool if you're a Batman or Robin fan, because that's what we're going to be working with here for our overflow. You can see the two floating boxes of content nested within the containing element. So here's our two boxes, and then here's our big box here, the containing element. And there are two possible values for overflow. There's scroll and hidden, and we'll look at those. Now what if the intention is to have the nested elements be the same height so the layout has a balanced look? Because you can see the Batman box is bigger than the Robin box, which isn't a surprise. Step 9.2, use the class selector for box and set its height at 300 pixels. So I'm going to go down here, type box, period, box, curly bracket, enter, and then I'm going to type height, colon, pixels, 300 pixels, save. And now you can see it changed it so it looks like this. So that's more even, but of course our text now isn't inside the boxes, so we're going to want to fix that. So now we're going to talk about the scroll value. That's the next header, scroll. The scroll value tucks the content within the containing element and adds a scroll bar to the box so users can scroll to see the hidden content. And there's an example of that in figure 9.21. So step 9.2.2. Add a new rule using the Batman class selector to scroll the overflow content. Now you're going to notice there's a typo in the book. We want to use period Batman, not just Batman. And then overflow, scroll, semicolon, and save it. And now you can see here I have a scroll bar and all the text is inside of it. So it's pretty cool what you can do there. Now we're going to jump over to step 9.2.3. Step 9.2.3, by switching the value from scroll to auto, you can clean up the look. Because do you see there's some extra space here and stuff, and so I'm going to go down here, double click on scroll and change it to auto and then save it. And now it adds a little bit more text, makes it look a little bit more nicer. Next we're looking at the hidden value. Hidden value simply hides any extra content that does not fit in the containing box. So Robin still has some extra text here, so we're going to fix that. So add a new rule. So I'm going to click down here, push enter to, as I accidentally added the quotation marks, push enter, type in Robin, curly brackets, and then overflow, hidden, semicolon, and save. And you can see all the text that was here, it went and hid and put away. Now position. Going and dealing with position here. The float property is not the only way to move elements about. The position property defines the type of positioning method used for an element. Possible values are static, relative, absolute, or fixed, and you can then use the top, right, bottom, and left properties to specify the element's position. So we're going to deal here with position static. Now the static position is the default way an element will appear in the normal flow of your HTML file if no position is specified at all. So static is just, it's going to show up how it would normally if you don't give a position for it. Now what we need to do is, it doesn't say here in the textbook, but we actually need to open up our other file. And so I'm going to exit out my browser preview, and then before I exit out this, I need to save and then choose open, and we're dealing with position here, so we're going to open up our position CSS file. I double click on that, exit out overflow.css. Then we need to zoom in. Well, you don't need to, but I will zoom in. You can see all this example code here. We're not going to change. We're going to scroll down to here because this is what we're going to be dealing with. Then I click on menu and choose browser preview. You could use the shortcut buttons. I just click on the menu button so you can see it. Browse, I got to choose my HTML file, so positioning, 03 positioning for HTML. And then I click open. Remember selection for this file and preview. Now again, don't be afraid to pause. I'm going through this here quickly to help the video stay as short as possible. But if you need to, pause the video, do the step, and then come back. Alright, so apply position static to the first box element and view the result. So I scroll past my example text here, or example code, down here where it says static element position static. Here's my first box element. I click inside of it, push tab, and then type in position static, semicolon, and I save it. Now you notice it doesn't change it because it stays where it would end up if I didn't have any coding already put in. Now position relative. Positioning an element with relative value keeps the element and the space it occupies in the normal flow of the HTML file. You can then move the element by some amount using properties left, right, top, and bottom. However, this may cause the element to overlap other elements that are on the page, which may or may not be the effect that you want. Now, why use static? Like float none, using position static when you want to remove one of the other values, relative, absolute, or fixed, that have been previously set on an element. Basically, you're giving yourself a clean slate with that code. All right, step 932. 932, add a new rule to apply position relative to the second box element. So I need to go down here to relative second box element. I click, push the tab button, and it says to pull the element up from its current position, use the top property with a value of -20 pixels, then push the element to the right using left property with a value of 50 pixels, and then view the result. So I need to type in here position relative, and then top -20 pixels, and then it says left 50 pixels. And I save it. And you'll notice it moves up here, so because it goes top -20, so that makes it move up here, and then it says left 50 pixels, which makes it move actually the opposite to the right. The result shows the relatively positioned div element moved from its original position using a negative value and to the right. However, notice two additional results. The space the div element originally occupies still remains. The element below doesn't come up to fill the vacated spot. The first div element is now being overlapped by the second div element, and more on this in a moment. So that's position relative. Position absolute, applying position absolute, which I'm going to scroll down here. So I'm ready to go. Click under third, push tab, and let's keep going. Applying the absolute position value to an element removes it from the normal flow. When you move the absolute position element, its reference point is the top left of its nearest containing element that has a position declared other than static, also called its nearest positioning context. So if no containing element with a position other than static exists, then it will be positioned from the top left corner of the body element. So this is going to be from the body element. Step 933. Write a new rule applying the absolute value to the position property for the third box element. So I'm typing in position absolute right here, and then set its top and left properties to 30 pixels each. So push enter, top 30 pixels, left 30 pixels. And then you can see it moves it all the way up here to our top left reference point, because this is the body here in the green. Since the two containing div elements with the class content and class container attributes are set to static by browser default, the element is absolutely positioned relative to the body element. If one of the containing div elements is set to relative position, the absolutely positioned element's top and left values will be applied to the relatively positioned element. Alright, step 934. Set the container selector, so down here I click, push tab, set the container selector to have a position value of relative. So position value of relative. Setting a relative position, you can see it moved, to a containing element gives the absolutely positioned element a new reference point, which is shown in figure 928. Now, positioning fixed, or position fixed. Positioning an element with the fixed value is the same as using the absolute value, except the containing element is always the browser window. So step 935, write a new rule for the fourth box. So I need to come down here. So fixed element position fixed, fourth box. I click under that tab, and it says apply the fixed value to position. So position fixed with a top value, I need to press enter here, top value of 0, a left value of 300 pixels, and a margin of 0. I save it. And now you can see my fixed one moved all the way up here. The element is removed from the flow of content. The bottom of the containing div collapses to the relatively positioned element and fixed at the top of the body element. So you can see that moved. Furthermore, an element that is positioned with a fixed value will not scroll with the document. It will remain in the position regardless of the scroll position on page. So if I were to scroll up and down, which I can't do, but if I were to scroll, this will always stay here. It will not move with the page. Step 9.3.6. So you can see the fixed element in action staying put. Add a new rule to the body element that sets the minimum height property to a value of 800 pixels. So set a new rule for the body. So down here, body, I click, press tab, min height 800 pixels. Now when I save it, when you review the result in the browser, resize your browser height needed until you have the ability to scroll. Now for this one, I'm not going to take the time to do that, but it will allow, you'll notice this will actually stay up here and you can scroll it up and down because of how it's been changed. Because often navigation on websites, usually at the top or the bottom, they'll have it so that it sticks to the page even if you're scrolling up and down. Now zindex, there's one more property to cover that works in conjunction with the position property. The zindex property sets a stack order of an element. An element with a greater stack order value is always in front on top of another element with a lower stack order value. By default, elements later in the source order will appear on top of elements earlier in the source order. So the zindex property allows you to alter this default stacking order. Values for zindex, which can be negative, set the order of the stack. By default, elements have a value of auto, which sets the stack order equal to their parent elements. And you can see example of that in figure 9.3.3 or 33. All right, next we're going to look at the zindex.html file. So I need to close out my browser preview. I need to click open after I've saved this file. And we're dealing with zindex. I'll close out position.css. You can see our example text here at the top we're not going to mess with to not mess up the file. Excuse me. And we're going to go down here because zindex, enter example code below. This is what we're going to be dealing with for the assignment. Then I'm going to click the menu button, choose browser preview, Control K and Control B. And of course tell it to open up the HTML file. You don't need to see the CSS file. Alright, there we go, we're ready to go. Now looking at the zindex.html in the browser, you'll see a normal stacking order with the default zindex value of auto and a position value static. So position static, zindex auto, and that's for all of these right here, div class selectors. When you open the zindex CSS document text editor, you'll see the default values for each element as it says. Now while these values are defaults, it's important to see what you'll be changing. So step 941. Step 941. First, change the static value to relative for content and first class selectors. So content and first class, I'm changing it for the static value to relative. So static, change to relative for content and for first. And then change static to absolute for second and third. So I'm changing static to absolute, or excuse me, static to absolute for second and third. Save it, you'll notice it changes it to look like this. And then step 942, add top and left values for the second and third class selectors. And you're going to need to either watch in the video or also the textbook as well to see how it is put in there. So for second, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in front of zindex, I push enter, I come back up to this row, and then I type in top 0 pixels, left 40 pixels. Now it's important to pay attention because for third you're going to be typing in something different. So I click down by zindex again, I push enter, move it up here, and I type top 20 pixels. You'll notice it's different. And then I type in left 200 pixels and then save. And you'll notice now it's stacked like this. So 1, 2, 3. The order like that. And it shows a picture of it in the book. So by default, the first HTML element, div class container, is farther back than the last element. So this is my parent element container. And of course, div class box third is on top because of the order of it. Now, step 943. 943, if you change the z index value from auto to 1 for the first class selector, so z index, we're going to change from auto, I'll push space, and then 1, save it, you'll notice it made so that the box 1 appears on top. While the first box was originally below the two other boxes, simply adding a value 1 sends the element to the top of the other elements. However, elements can also be moved down or farther away in the stacking order with negative values. So step 944. Step 944, change the third class selector, so down here, z index from auto to -1. So I'm going to double click here, push space, -1, and save. And now you notice it made these two appear over the box 3 element, and even this gray part here. So since the other two elements have a value of auto for their z index, the negative value will cause the element to be displayed behind them. While two elements that have the default value of z, or default z index value of auto, an element with an integer value, positive or negative, will automatically bypass them and move in front with a positive value or behind with a negative value. Wow, now you have the foundations of positioning and stacking order of positioned elements with the z index property. There's one last layout property to review. We're almost there, guys. The display property. The display property controls the type of box an element generates. You know there are block level elements, and it lists those, inline elements, and even replace elements. Well, you can cause a block level element to display like an inline element, or an inline element to display as a block element. There's even an option to have them render as an inline block, 2 blocks in one. So let's open up our display.html file. I'm going to exile my browser preview. I'm going to click open after I've saved this. Open. I'm choosing display. I'm going to open that up. I'll exile the old file. I'll zoom in so I can see the text, or so you can see the text here. Of course, don't mess with the stuff at the top. And of course, I'm going down here because this is where we're going to type it in under inline to block and M. I'll do a browser preview after that. So I click menu button, browser preview. Of course, choose your HTML file that you want to see, which is display. It's our last one. We're almost there. All right. You'll see a page with one section that has text surrounded by an inline element, so emphasis, and another section contained the block level DL element. So now in a text editor, open up display.css, which we've already done. And it goes through some boxes here of text. We're just going to keep on going here for sake of time. Display block. The block value causes an element to generate a block box. When rendering an inline element as a block, the element no longer sits inline but on a new line, and it spans the width of the containing element. So step 951. Enter in the properties and values for margin, padding, text align, and line height for an inline M element selector. So under M, I need to type in all this. Oh, I need to press tab. So margin, 20 pixels, 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 0. Padding, 10 pixels, text align, right, and then line height, 2.5 M. Now again, don't be afraid to pause. You need to all save it. You notice it changed how the text looks up here, specifically with the spacing. When viewing the changes, notice the properties that affect horizontal spacing, but not the vertical top and bottom spacing are applied, because we did put in some for top and bottom. So step 952. Step 952. Now add the display property with the block value. So under line height, I see it. Still have my insertion point here. I press enter, and then I put in display, block, and save it. Now you notice it displays it as a block element. It has a whole line to itself now. With the inline element rendered as a block, the inline element renders a new block box, creating a new line like a block element. The margin values for the top and bottom will now apply. You can see that. And the element will expand to the width of the containing element. Note, the margin of 10 pixels on the right is adding space between the emphasis element and the P element paragraph. The line height property now applies. So all this stuff actually applies because we have a display as a block. Now, we need to work on displaying block to inline. So I'm scrolling down here because this is what we're going to work with. The inline value causes an element to generate one or more inline boxes. An inline element accepts margin and padding, but will only push other elements horizontally, not vertically. When the block element is rendered as an inline element, it no longer breaks the flow of text but sits within the line. For your block DD element selector, the following code is already provided, and you can see this code right here. Now simply, step 953, now simply add in the display property with the value of inline. So under height 50 pixels, I'm going to click here, push tab, display inline. And I save it. You'll notice it changes the blocks down there. Navigation styles. When designers want to create horizontal navigation, the inline value for display has often been applied to list elements that contain links, and more navigation styles in chapter 12. And then of course it talks about overriding rules in chapter 5. Now going on to the text, once the block level element is rendered as an inline element, the block element will display inline, not on its own line, you can see that. Margin will no longer be applied to the top and bottom, you can also see that, and the element will expand only to the width of its content. So you can see how it's very close to the text. Display inline block. Display inline block. So I'm going to go down further to here and click in there. The inline block value makes the element generate one or more inline boxes and generate a block box that's laid out as if it were an inline box. So an inline block has some characteristics of an inline element and some characteristics of a block level element. Inline quality. Elements remain in the flow of text. Block quality. Elements accept the vertical values, margin, top and bottom, included height, and line height. So step 954. It's 954. Getting ahead here. Finally, add a new rule that applies the inline block value for the display property for both the M and the DD selectors. So down here I'm going to click, push tab, display, inline, block, and save. When refreshing the browser, notice the changes to both the rendered block level element and the rendered inline elements, white boxes. You can see it made a change. The inside of an inline block is formatted as a block box, and the element itself is formatted as an inline level box. So inline quality, the element stays in the same line, and then also block quality, vertical spacing values, the margin, top and bottom are allowed. A pretty powerful and useful property / value combination. However, as any good thing in web design, there are gotchas to be had with this value. Check out the website for links to articles concerning the inline block value. Other displays values. As mentioned, there are a number of other display values, about 14 more, including inherent and none at your disposal. Check out the website for video tutorials and resources. So wrapping things up, you made it through the basics of display properties, float, position, and display in CSS, along with some of their associated properties, clear, overflow, and zindex. In the next couple of chapters, you're going to use these properties to learn how web designers develop layouts for websites, as well as some new CSS3 layout options. Great job making it through this video. Good job to those of you who are following along with your book, following along with the video as well. You want to remember this information because you will need it for your midterm assignment, which is coming up next. Make sure that you properly zip this whole file up together. Make sure you put your name on it, and then of course submit it through eLocker Online. Great job again following along. Good job paying attention.